Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Alberni, Alberniweather.ca. I haven't done a blog for a little while, and this should be a good one. Um, this is a presentation that I actually wanted to make last week at the Alberni Valley Transition Town Society Wildfire Public Forum. Um, so there was a forum on Wednesday last week, May 20th. 2026. You can look for it on YouTube. It's on their Alberni Valley Transition Town YouTube feed, and it is, I believe, posted on their Facebook page. So you can find it there. It was really good. There were lots of people there, and there were lots of officials from the ACRD and the city, and from BC Wildfire. And there was lots of good information and questions from the public and stuff. So I was part of a panel that was the main purpose of that public forum, and I was just representing transition towns and giving some information on climate. And how it's changed in Port Alberni and the Alberni Valley. So I wasn't able to do the full presentation because we were a little short on time. So I wanted to give the full presentation here so that at least it was captured and shareable. So this is a presentation that I've done a few times over the past decade, more than a decade. First time I did this was in 2013. I pulled together all of the information, all of the data from various stations in the Alberni Valley to look at temperature trends. I did that again in 2019. What's different today is Environment Canada has updated their data and done some important work there. So that's what I'm going to focus on today, and there's some interesting data there. First thing I always do when I do these kinds of presentations is emphasize I am not a scientist, I'm not a climatologist, I'm not a meteorologist, I'm just a weather enthusiast, I like to call myself, and a concerned citizen, and a citizen and resident of Port Alberni. I grew up in Port Alberni and have lived here the vast majority of my life. So I've been looking at this stuff for a little while. Alberniweather has been online since 2005, so we're going into our 21st year of capturing data. But this is going to be focused on Environment Canada data. So Environment Canada has had a number of stations in the Alberni Valley over the years. So since 1900, there have been, if we count these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 stations. The first one, I don't know if my pointer is going to show up here. No. The first one is Beaver Creek. So that showed up first. It was first initiated as a precipitation station in the 1880s, 1886, I believe it was, or maybe it's 1896, one or the other. And then in 1900, it started to record temperature data. So that's the earliest we have. After that, the Port Alberni station, not the Port Alberni A, but the Port Alberni one down in the city there, that was the second one, the second sort of historical station. It started in the 1910s. It was near the city hall, where it is today, close by to there. And it went, both the Beaver Creek and the Port Alberni station went until about 1950. Those are the historical stations, and those are the stations that had the most variation. So environmental stations and observation stations have gone through a lot of technological advancement over the years and decades, especially in the 20th century. So those earlier stations are known to have issues with high and low temperatures not being necessarily perfectly accurate. They're accurate, but they're not as consistent, I think, is the main thing as modern instrumentation. So there's been lots of studies done, of course, in this field, because it's very important to be able to go back so far, as far as we can in the observational record that we have. You're only talking 100, 200 years at most. I think there are some stations in Europe that go back up to 300 years, perhaps. But that's it, right? So it's important that we use the data that we have, and there's been lots of work done, research done on how to correct for those, older methods of observations. So what Environment Canada does is it takes all of the stations in an area, or a couple of the representative stations, and does what's called an adjusted and homogenization. So adjustment and a homogenization of the data. So you end up with this adjusted and homogenized Canadian climate data. So they've done this for stations across the country, but they have only done it for Port Alberni very recently. So I think in the past maybe 2 years or so. They don't kind of say when they're going to do this stuff. It just kind of appears on their website. So we are now included in this adjusted homogenized Canadian climate data, which is great. That's why you're seeing, when you see high temperatures and comparisons to historical records on the news and stuff, now for Port Alberni, you see them going all the way back to 1900. And that's because of this data set. So this is very recent, and it's great because it gives us very local data to compare to climate change and see where our trends are going. So what I wanted to focus on for the forum was wildfire. So I've picked out 2 graphs that Environment Canada has produced. They actually produced this for all of the stations, and all the data and stuff is available on my website on alberniweather.ca. It's a little hard to find on the Environment Canada website, so I downloaded it all. Of course, it'll be just for the time that I downloaded it, but it's all there, so you can go onto my blog, and the most recent update there is this update, or you can just search for it under climate data, or look for the climate change link in the links in the menu. So the 2 I've chosen here. The first one is the annual maximum temperatures. So this is taken for the average throughout the year. They take every day. They take the maximum temperature every day, and they average that all out for the whole year. And when you do that, it's a very common way of sort of long-term climate comparisons. So, because climate is generally around 30 to 40 year blocks of time to get those sort of climate signals, weather versus climate, right? So when they're doing this, they do it over averages over a year. So for Port Alberni, our annual maximum temperature, the average over the whole year, has gone from about 11 to 14 degrees, and you can see that in the graph here. Between about 1900 and 1950, it goes, it's always going up and down a little bit, just on a variable annual basis, but it was between about 11 and 14 degrees Celsius. After 1950, and certainly since into the 2000s, you start to see a trend upwards, and we're seeing a trend of about 13 to 16 degrees C. So we are no longer anywhere near 11 degrees C. We haven't seen that for over 100 years. We haven't seen an annual maximum temperature that low since 1910, it looks like 1915 maybe. So over 100 years there. So we're definitely seeing an uptick there. And if you look at the very end of the graph, what I find most concerning is that very end part. You can see the spike in 2011, I believe that is, maybe 2012. That's probably an El Nino year when we were very high. But you can see we didn't come back down from that, and we're up around 15 degrees Celsius as an annual maximum average. So that's high. Um, what I wanted to show for in terms of wildfire and in terms of things that we notice in our changing climate, I think what we notice much more because of our specific geography, our specific place on Vancouver Island in Canada, is the change in the minimum temperatures. Previously, in the early part of the century, pre-climate change and pre-industrial revolution, we saw annual minimums. We can see them here between about 1 and 3 degrees. So this is minimum temperatures. So again, you take a day, you take the minimum temperature of that day, and you do that for every day of the year, and then you average all of those minimums together, and this is the number that you come out with. So you can see in 1900 to about 1920, we actually were in a downward kind of a trend, from around 3 degrees Celsius, maybe 4 degrees Celsius, down to about 1 degree Celsius in the middle of the teens there, 1910 to 1920. That's where it kind of bottomed out, it looks like. But you can see that we were around 1 to 3 degrees Celsius, and up to about 1950. That is an important range. It's a very important space of temperature because that's where you start to make snow, right? Anything below about 3 degrees Celsius, and you can start to see snow production. Even snow lying on or staying on the ground, or just falling in the air. Above 3 degrees Celsius, you don't generally see snow at all being formed, whether it's in the air or certainly staying on the ground. So after 1950, you can see in this graph, you can see the bottom is really, on a very clear upward trajectory from those early 1900s to the early 2020s now, right, or early 2000s. So now we're closer to 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, and there's no way to create snow at those temperatures. So again, this is an average, so there's going to be times when it's, the minimum is going to be, below zero, or even significantly below zero for a few days at a time. But the average shows us that over time, that's not where it's going to be most of the time. Most of the time it's going to be above freezing, and it'll be above 3 degrees or so. So this is really important for our ability to have a snowpack, for our ability to retain water in the landscape from sea level all the way into the mountains. So a big reason why we're seeing drought is because we're seeing much more rain and much less snow. The rain and the water just flows through the system, whereas the snow keeps that moisture locked on land into the spring and summer, and it's able to release slowly, so the land can absorb it, right? So that is a huge difference in our ecology and in our in what we see and what we feel as people in Port Alberni and on Vancouver Island. If you look back at historical images, you'll see lots and lots of snow. You'll see not just days of a little bit of snow, but days with lots of snow, feet of snow, many feet of snow, and you're just not seeing that anymore. And I think this graph really tells the story why. It's because the minimum temperatures have left that snow making area. Okay, so that's the biggest thing that I wanted to get across. Some other interesting data that I was able to just go through and pull out very quickly from these new data sets. Again, this is all the way back to 1900. So I wanted to see if on the extreme end of things, on the heat end of things, if that had changed. And one of the ways you can do that is to see if things have continued to rise. And this is one way we can see that. So extreme events in Port Alberni, the first time that we reached 35 degrees Celsius, that we observed that in the temperature record, was 100 years ago, 1926. Now I would say, and you can see here in the slide, there's a good gap. There's a good 30 years between that first 35 and the first 37 degrees. And obviously 36 is in there too, but there was actually no recorded extreme of 36 degrees. It went straight to 37 in 1958. So I think this is an indication, and I don't have the raw data to back it up, but I think that's an indication that maybe 35 was the historical extreme for this region, right? So going over the history of pre-colonial, pre-industrial revolution, pre-climate change, pre-global warming, 35 was probably the maximum that people saw, and maybe we can have that confirmed in indigenous stories in some way, maybe by describing the land or by describing what happened around them. But I'm willing to bet that 35 degrees is probably the previous historical, the ancestral temperatures, the ancestral extreme temperature in this region. Then, like I said, and like you can see here, since the 1950s, we have been on a steady rise in extreme temperatures. So the first 37 degrees was 58, the first 38 was 60 and 65, the first 39 degree was 1981. So that was after I was born. The first 40 degree took another 20 years, almost 30 years, and that was 2009, right? And then the last one, the maximum to this date, extreme temperature that we've had in Port Alberni is 42.7 degrees Celsius during the heat dome in 2021. And of course, we know that that was the day that Lytton, British Columbia, burned down right after recording the highest temperature in Canada ever recorded, which was 50 degrees. I believe, in fact, I think it is absolutely inevitable, and it would be foolish to believe anything else. But I believe with this trend, we can only assume that we will hit 50 degrees in Port Alberni at some point before 2100, and possibly much before 2100. We are certainly on a track to be able to hit that. You can figure it out yourself. If we move on the same kind of time frame as this, we went from 35 degrees in 1926 to 40 degrees in 2009. That's what, 25, that's 75, 80 years to go 5 degrees. So another 80 years to go 7 degrees. Yeah, I think we can get there. That's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. So this isn't a way of, or I wouldn't characterize this as, wanting this to happen, certainly, or trying to alarm people that it would happen, but simply saying matter of factly, the past 80 years has seen a solid 7-degree rise in the extreme temperatures measured in Port Alberni. So why, if we are continuing our CO2 increases in the atmosphere and doing nothing on that end to bring them down, then how can we not expect another 7 degrees of rise in the extreme temperatures in the coming years? So maybe we won't see 50 degrees Celsius until 2121. That's possible, since we were, 1926 was 35, 2121 might be 50, or it could be before that. And I believe that the heating that we are seeing is still accelerating. So it's not just moving higher at a constant rate. I believe it's accelerating. So I do believe that it will happen before 2121. So that's what I believe about the heat, extreme heat coming. Extreme events in Port Alberni as far as rain. We've been fairly lucky as far as the atmospheric rivers that have started to really become one of the big impacts from climate change in our region. We've always had atmospheric rivers. They used to be called Pineapple Express, is what a lot of people used to call them. They were always called atmospheric rivers in a scientific community, but now that's kind of come into the mainstream. But we've seen these kinds of patterns in the past, but not to this intensity, and that's what climate change has brought us and global warming has brought us. As the ocean warms and as the atmosphere warms, that means the ocean will evaporate more moisture, and the atmosphere will be able to absorb more of that moisture, and that's why atmospheric rivers have become more dangerous. And with the changes in the jet stream pattern and the changes that have happened there, where now the jet stream, rather than always flowing across in a fairly steady stream, it can often become very bent and wobbly, which causes weather patterns to stall and not move quickly across. So that's really what causes these extreme events. If we have an atmospheric river and it's pointed at Vancouver Island, and we have a jet stream that is keeping that stationary, so keeping the pointing place stationary, then that's where we have these massive events like we did in November 2021. So we were very lucky in 2021 in Port Alberni. The atmospheric river was generally pointed at the south part of Vancouver Island and the Fraser Valley. So it didn't come too much past Port Alberni as far as like Mount Smith, basically. The major impacts all happened just south of there, basically. So we were lucky for that. And we should take the opportunity now to prepare with the assumption that we won't be necessarily as lucky next time if we have another extreme atmospheric river event. It's just a matter of where it points on the island. It could be on the North Island, pointed at Port Hardy. It could be on the Central Island, pointed at us. It could be on the South Island, as it was in November 2021. So it's just a matter of luck and our being prepared for it. And it's worth noting on the BC wildfire scene and our local landscapes, wildfire scars make that more perilous, because you get more landslides because there's less forest to hold that land in place. So wildfire scars and clear cuts make those impacts much worse. And we saw that in November 2021. And then finally, on the general sort of extreme topic of drought and wildfire and low river levels, again, I believe the Alberni inlet fire, the Mt Underwood fire, was again a near miss for us. We were very lucky that the southerly afternoon breeze that we so often get in Port Alberni during the summer did not activate on that day that it started, especially, or even really after that very much. So that was very lucky for us. It could have been, and I did a post on the blog not too long after, I think it was September or October, I did a post on the Alberniweather, looking at the days in August and September where we had that typical Alberni Inlet inflow breeze. And there was a very clear gap that started just before the wildfire started and ended just after it the worst of it was over. So I think we got very lucky there. Thank goodness, BC Wildfire did what it could to keep the fire at bay, but it was definitely helped by the fact that the wind did not happen on that day, especially the day that it started. So that's the main points that I wanted to get across for that presentation. Just that Port Alberni is warming, along with global predictions and the trends that we're seeing on the island, in Canada, and around the world. So it's not a surprise that 1.5 C to 2 C rise in temperatures is having an impact here as well, especially when it comes to snow. The wet and the dry seasons are changing. So the wet seasons are becoming more intermittent, not as reliable, and the dry seasons are expanding into the shoulders. So we used to have a dry season in basically July and August. Now, our dry season is extending into May, June, and into September, October. So we're seeing a lot more dry spells in those months than we did in the past. And then, of course, more extreme events. So extreme heat events, extreme rain events, and then droughts to go along with it. The rain trends, I didn't mention it in the data there, but there is precipitation data in the Environment Canada adjusted and homogenized climate data, but it does not yet include Port Alberni. So I'm hoping that one day we will get that from Environment Canada, and maybe we'll be able to see some trends in rainfall over the past century. But what's clear, and what I think is more important, is that the snowpack is disappearing, and it can only be expected that it will continue to lessen in the coming years as the minimum temperatures continue to rise. So thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting and informative. Please check out alberniweather.ca, and I'll see you again another time. Thank you.